All right, so today we're diving deep into something pretty incredible, the emotional architecture of the psychedelic brain. We're going to go way beyond the headlines to really understand how these compounds can physically change the way we feel, right down to the level of our brain cells.
You've probably heard the buzz, right? That psychedelic therapy could be a total game changer for things like depression. But the million-dollar question is, how? I mean, what is actually happening in the brain that allows a single experience to create such a huge shift in someone's emotional world?
Well, to really get it, we have to start with the problem itself. At their core, a lot of mood disorders are really about how our brains process emotions. And what's so interesting about psychedelics is that they seem to come at this problem from a completely different angle than what we've seen before.
And here's the crucial difference right here. A lot of traditional antidepressants like SSRIs tend to work by kind of turning down the volume on all emotions. It's that feeling some people describe as just feeling numb or blunted. But psychedelics, they appear to do the exact opposite. It's not about emotional suppression, it's about emotional re-engagement.
Okay, and this is where the science gets really fascinating and frankly a little counterintuitive. It turns out it's not about shutting down negative feelings. In fact, for someone with depression, it might be about turning them up. So check this out. This slide is showing us something wild about the amygdala. That's our brain's emotional threat detector. In healthy people, psilocybin actually calms the amygdala's response to negative stuff. But look at the middle column. In people with depression, it actually increases its reactivity the day after a session. This is the complete opposite of how a typical SSRI works.
And this just lays it out so clearly. On the one hand, you have SSRIs reducing that reactivity, which can sometimes lead to that blunted feeling. On the other hand, psilocybin actually ramps it up in patients, and researchers have a great term for this: emotional re-engagement. The whole idea isn't to help you avoid difficult feelings, it's to create a state where you can finally turn and face them and actually process them.
This quote from the research paper just nails it. Rather than blunting affect, psychedelics help individuals engage with and integrate previously suppressed emotional experiences. In other words, it's a total shift from a strategy of avoidance to one of active processing.
But this emotional re-engagement isn't just about what's happening inside your own head. The research shows this has a ripple effect. It also seems to reliably change our ability to connect with the emotions of other people.
We're talking specifically about something called emotional empathy, which is the ability to genuinely share and feel what someone else is feeling. It's such a huge part of our social bonds, and honestly, our overall sense of well-being.
And what's so compelling here is just how consistent this finding is. It doesn't matter if we're looking at LSD, psilocybin, or even the Amazonian brew ayahuasca. The result keeps coming back the same: an increase in emotional empathy. This doesn't seem to be a random side effect. It looks like a core feature of what these substances do.
So we've seen how psychedelics can help us reconnect with our own feelings, and even with others. But what about the actual experience itself? The quote-unquote trip. Let's take a look at the entire emotional journey, from the peak of the experience to what happens weeks and months later. And that, of course, brings up a really important question that a lot of people have. What about bad trips? Or, as researchers prefer to call them, challenging experiences. It seems to go against everything we think, but could an experience that feels awful in the moment actually be good for you in the long run?
Okay, get ready for this because this statistic is pretty mind-blowing. In one huge survey, a whopping 84% of people said their toughest psychedelic experience was one of the 5 most difficult things they'd ever been through in their entire lives. And yet, they still said it was beneficial for them long-term. It really suggests that just like in good therapy, sometimes working through the really hard stuff is where the real growth happens.
So this timeline kind of maps out that whole journey. You've got the really intense peak effects for a few hours. Then there's that famous afterglow the next day with elevated mood. But here's the really crucial part. Those changes in empathy and emotional processing, they don't just vanish. They can stick around for a week or more, creating this incredible window of opportunity for real, lasting improvements.
Which brings us to the final, and maybe the most important piece of the whole puzzle. How on earth can a single experience create such lasting change? Well, the answer lies in the brain's amazing ability to physically rewire itself. So let's just ask it straight up. How is it possible that an experience lasting just a few hours can begin to rewrite emotional patterns that have been there for decades? Well, it's not magic, it's straight up biology.
And the key word here, the concept that makes all of this possible, is neuroplasticity.
It's a pretty simple idea when you break it down. It's just the brain's fundamental ability to adapt and change by forming new connections between its cells. It's the physical basis of how we learn anything.
Now, I know this slide might look a little complicated, but the core idea is really simple. We're zooming way, way in, down to the level where two brain cells connect. And scientists are now calling psychedelics psychoplastogens, basically promoters of plasticity, because they kick off this chemical chain reaction you see here that physically encourages neurons to grow new branches and form new connections. Let's break down exactly how that works.
So here's the process in 4 simple steps. First, the psychedelic molecule clicks into a specific receptor on a neuron, kind of like a key in a lock. That then triggers the release of other important chemicals, especially one called BDNF, which you can basically think of as pure fertilizer for your brain cells. This BDNF kicks off a whole growth cascade inside the cell, sparking the physical growth of new connections and leading to a more interconnected brain.
And this isn't just happening randomly all over the brain. This rewiring seems to be concentrated in the very brain circuits that are critical for regulating our mood and processing our emotions. The exact circuits that often get stuck in a rut with conditions like depression and anxiety. It's like a targeted biological upgrade for our emotional hardware.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. Psychedelics don't just change our minds, they physically change our brains. By turbocharging this neuroplasticity, they open up this incredible window of opportunity to rewire the very emotional circuits that can keep us feeling stuck. Which leaves us with a pretty powerful question to ponder. If we can actually help the brain physically heal and rewire itself, what's next for the future of mental health?